So when I went to college as a freshman, I immediately declared a major in philosophy because I'm kind of a nerd. I also declared a major in creative writing and critical literary theory, and I don't want to talk about that. It's kind of a shameful time for me. Not really. Critical theory is great. But by Christmas break, I had acquired a set of argumentation skills that I was very proud of. I had taken an informal logic class. I had started sort of reading informal logic. I had worked with some professors on rhetoric and composition. I was super excited to show off my argumentation skills. So on Christmas Eve, I got my brother and my sister together, and I decided to provoke an argument. I wanted to think of the most provocative and controversial and moderately upsetting thing I could think of. And so I said to them, there is only one good argument for the conclusion that God exists. There's only one. And it's Aquinas' teleological argument. My brother and sister looked at me like I had two heads. Fair enough. They said, what does teleology mean? And I was like, oh. Sweet little innocent philosophers. I proceeded to explain the argument to them, right? And at the end I said, this is the one and only argument for God's existence that works. My sister said, I don't know. You know, like when I was in college, we went over a bunch of different arguments, and I kind of thought this one worked. It was by Anselm, it was ontological. I don't know, that sort of worked. My brother was like, I don't think you need arguments for God's existence. And I was like, you're a moron. And the discussion got really heated, really quickly, right? Eventually, so remember, this is Christmas Eve, my sister starts crying. And my brother is so furious, he just wants to punch me in the face, okay? Yes, thank you. Just wants to punch me in the face. He's so upset, so angry. And he leaves, and I sat down on the couch in our living room, and I just thought to myself, why are they so upset? I've done them a great service. I revealed the truth to them. This is what I thought, okay? This is what I thought. And so eventually I gathered them back together. We're sitting in the living room, and I said to my sister, I don't get it. I don't get it. Like, we argued about this, and we arrived at some sort of truth, and I objected to all the premises that you raised in favor of your points, and, I supported my own premises, and now we should all just, I literally said this phrase. I'm embarrassed to tell you I said this phrase. I said, we should rejoice in the truth. Oh, God. I said, it's Christmas. Let us rejoice in the truth. And I turned to my brother and I said, I don't get it. I said, am I wrong? Am I wrong about this? And channeling one of his and my favorite movies, he responded. You guys ever seen The Big Lebowski? Yeah. Oh, thank God. Okay. He told me, you're not wrong, man. You're just kind of an asshole. Okay? I have two learning goals for you. One is that by the end of these two lectures, I guess I said today's class, but by the end of these two lectures, you'll have the skills to ruin Christmas, just like I did, right? You'll be able to argue effectively. You'll have those skills, but after the semester, here in God and the Good Life, you're going to be so intellectually virtuous that you're going to decide not to, okay? So these are the two things that I want for you. We're going to focus today on the first of these two things. And in fact, we're going to break it up, like I said, into two different sections. So first, we're going to talk about argumentation and philosophical conversation. That's today. On Monday, we're going to be talking about argumentation and philosophical writing. Okay. So here are the four things that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the elements of argumentation. What are the basic parts of an argument? What even is an argument? What are you trying to do when you argue? Then we're going to cover the aim of argumentation. What's the goal? It's obviously not to make your sister cry or anyone else cry. So what is it? Then we're going to talk about a couple of tools. In particular, I'm going to give you 3 tools. These are tools that you read about in the packet for today. We're going to go through those in just a little bit more detail. And then we're going to talk about philosophical conversations. What is a philosophical conversation? What makes it a distinctive mode of engaging or addressing your peers? All right, so that's what we're doing. So let's start with the element of argumentation. In argument, and keep in mind that as with most definitions in this class, this is going to be sort of a useful tool, right? A heuristic, if you will. If you're studying for the GRE, heuristic, look that up. Now you probably all know what that means. So these definitions, they're not the only definitions that you could give of these terms, but one of the points of this sort of unit, the argumentation unit, is to give us a shared language, right? So that we can help each other become better at arguing. So, pretty much accept the definitions that I'm giving you at face value. If you have a huge problem with it, raise your hand. We can sort of talk about alternative definitions and whether we should amend our definitions. But for the most part, let's just work with these definitions, and then we can get more sophisticated later in the semester. All right, so what is an argument? It is a verbal or textual attempt to establish the truth of some claim. Verbal or textual attempt to establish the truth of some claim. Okay, kind of get that. So like E, though, where's E? Ifan. See here. E, like E. I like breaking down definitions into their more basic parts, right? So what exactly does our definition of an argument mean? Well, first of all, the word claim appears in it. So what's a claim? The way that we're going to use the phrase a claim is a proposition or an assertion. It's something that can be true or false. Might be easier to offer some examples. So the earth travels around the sun. That could be true or it could be false, right? It's the sort of thing to which the property of truth could apply. Maybe that's the better way to say it. Because you might think like the earth necessarily travels around the sun. That is how it works, right? It's the sun's in the sun's in the middle. Okay, good. So it's the sort of thing that can be true or false. Here's another one. Here's another example. It's always morally wrong to kill an innocent human person. It's kind of a mouthful, but that's another proposition. It's another assertion. Okay, so how do you establish the truth of such a thing? Well, that's easy. With other more basic claims. So consider the following set of claims. Only sentient creatures are worthy of moral consideration. There's a couple of words in there we might want to define. What's a sentient creature? Rhetorical question, rhetorical answer. It is a creature that is able to feel and reflect in some capacity on its experiences. Like, don't actually quote that around the philosophy department. Sentience is the sort of thing that cats have, that chimpanzees have, that we have, and we all share this property in common, right? We're all sentient beings. We can feel pleasure, we can feel pain, we avoid pain, and we seek pleasure. Only sentient creatures are worthy of moral considerations. Here's another claim. Fetuses are not sentient creatures. They're not like cats or chimpanzees or us in the relevant sense. They're not sentient. Therefore, fetuses are not worthy of moral consideration. So let's break the argument down a little bit. Let's call the first two premises supporting claims. If claims 1 and 2 are true, then claim 3, which is our conclusion, is also going to be true. So just look at it for a second, kind of try to grasp the logical structure. Only sentient creatures are worthy of moral consideration. Fetuses are not sentient creatures. Therefore, fetuses are not worthy of moral consideration. It logically follows. Now, there are formal ways that we could prove that it logically follows. We could do a bunch of like mathy sort of stuff, and a lot of people in philosophy do that sort of thing. I don't really that often. You could, though. You could. We're not going to focus on that in this class. If you're really interested in it, I can give you some books or point you to the library. Let's call the first kinds of claims, claims 1 and 2, supporting claims, okay? They're more basic. They're supporting claims. And let's call the third claim here the central claim. You might also hear me refer to it as the conclusion, because that's just so ingrained in my head, I can't get rid of it. It's a central claim. Okay, so using sort of the terms that we've just defined, an argument is a verbal or textual attempt to establish the truth of some central claim by means of more basic supporting claims. Okay, I'm going to actually stop there for 1 second. That's all we got on the elements of argumentation. Are there any questions? Awesome. So now let's talk a little bit about the aim of argumentation. So when you're faced with some claim, whether it's a supporting claim or whether it's a central claim, you essentially have three options. You could affirm that claim. You would say, that claim is true. Or you could be more creative and say, yeah, that claim's true. Use the contraction. You could suspend judgment. You could say, I don't know if that claim's true or false. I'm not going to believe it, but I'm not going to actively disbelieve it. I just don't know. I don't know one way or the other. That's where skeptics spend most of their time, right? That's where Descartes thinks we should live intellectually, in the suspending judgment sort of mode. Or you could just outright reject it, right? You could say, I think that claim's false. It's just not true. You might say, it's just not true that fetuses are not sentient creatures. I reject that claim, right? Okay, those are the three. If an argument is a verbal attempt or a textual attempt to establish the truth of some claim, then a successful argument is going to actually establish it, right? It's going to get whoever the target audience of that argument is, whether that's yourself, whether you're trying to convince yourself of a particular claim, or whether that's an opponent in a debate, or whether that's just your peer group, or your sister or your brother. It's going to get them to affirm that claim. Okay, so just so we have it in a really pithy sort of phrase, arguments just aim to establish the truth of some claim or persuade others to believe that some claim is true. That's the aim of argumentation. This might sound kind of obvious, but it's sort of controversial, right? The point of argumentation is to get at the truth. So I said earlier that I studied critical literary theory, and I'm not going to go into it a ton, but I do want to say there are some people who think that there's no such thing as truth, or that truth is in some way deeply subjective, and they're wrong about that, but they also think that arguments are valuable. Why do they think arguments are valuable? Typically, they think that if you can argue, you can wield power over another group or another set of individuals. So some extreme postmodern theorists, this might not be an actually true view, but it is entailed by some things some people say. They're going to say something like the aim of argumentation is actually to wield power, or maybe to wield it well, or something like that. I think that position is incoherent for various reasons. But in philosophy, the assumption is that there's this thing, truth, that we can get to it through reasoning and argumentation. So for the time being, and I will give you a chance to dispute this actually in the session where we have people come up and debate. For the time being, we're going to assume that the aim of argumentation is to get at the truth, or to establish the truth of some particular claim. Okay, so let's look really quickly at the tools of argumentation. I gave you three of them. First, we have clarification. Clarification is rephrasing a claim to make it more clear, precise, or intelligible. These are words you're going to hear a lot, especially if you hang around with analytic philosophers. They're going to say that wasn't very clear. Can you make that more precise? I don't know that your argument's intelligible. No, they don't really say the last one. But the first two, is it true? We say this a lot as analytic philosophers. It's got to be really clear and really precise, right? If you're making a claim, or if you're arguing for a claim, but nobody can understand what the claim is, or what it really means, then your argument is not going to be very strong at all. Or it might not be interesting at all, right? Because it might just be trivially true. You might not have to argue for it in the first place. So clarification, that's our first tool of argumentation. Objection. Objection is providing a reason to think that a claim is false. Don't get too caught up by the reason talk. What's a reason? I don't know. Don't think about it right now. If you start doing that, you just go down the rabbit hole of philosophy, and you're like, what is reason? What's a reason? What is reason? It's no, stop. Please, stop. That's for the second philosophy course. Just think of it like this. If I want to sort of dispute a claim that you're making, I have to give you a reason to think that that claim is false. I can't just say no, or I could, but that's not going to be effective, right? So if Justin says, the sky is green, I guess I could go, nuh-uh. Maybe this is a bad example. But better to say something like this. No, Justin. Don't you know that there are wavelengths that interact with our eyeballs in certain ways? I don't know. No, okay? All right. In any event, I could give him a reason to think like I do, to think his claim was false, right? That's an objection. All right, support is just providing a reason to think a claim is true. It's just the opposite of an objection. All right, so let's go in a tiny bit more detail. So what does clarifying actually look like? What does the process of clarifying actually look like? And good, I think you all realize that the entirety of the content of the presentation's on the handout, so don't worry too much about taking notes. You can follow along in the handout if you want. Good, okay. Should have said that at the beginning. Clarification. Consider the following claim, like we did in our last class period. Doubting science is irresponsible. Okay? Doubting science is irresponsible. Might be true, it might be false, but like as it stands, I don't really know what it means, right? So you might say, well, okay, by doubting here, I just mean failing to believe or act on those beliefs. What is it to doubt? It's to fail to believe or to act on beliefs that you have, right? And what does it mean to be irresponsible? Well, in this case, I'm talking about moral responsibility. You might think there's a lot of different kinds of responsibility, right? You might think there's moral responsibility. You might think there's distinctively epistemic types of responsibility. Sorry, that was not a good phrase to use. There might be other types of responsibility. I'm just saying all I'm worried about in this claim is moral responsibility. I want to say that doubting science is morally irresponsible. So here's my new claim, my more precise, clarified claim. It is morally irresponsible to fail to believe in accord with science. Now you might want to clarify this even further. What does it mean to believe in accord with science? Is there some set of beliefs that science somehow entails, and we have to believe things that are compatible with all those things? Do we have to believe every single entailment of scientific theories? If so, which scientific theories? This could get really complex really fast, right? So you can continue to clarify, and in fact, many good philosophy papers are just sort of exercises in clarification up until a certain point, and then an attempt to argue some very specific claim, right? You might say, look, everybody's been speaking as if we understand what it means to believe in accord with science. But I'm going to argue that we have no idea what that means. Here are the possible ways of believing in accord with science. Here's why we should think this is the thing that it's responsible to do and morally irresponsible not to do. Here's why that's true or false, right? Good. Questions about clarification? Or clarifications about clarification? Sorry. Okay, yeah.
Are the symbols that we're using in this class, are those like accepted throughout the philosophy world, or did you?
In philosophy talk, it's called negation. So if you use that like symbol, it's kind of like a mathematical symbol in that like a lot of people will adopt this kind of symbolic use. Also for support, this is like one way of representing entailment. So there's some tie to like formal symbolic logic, but they're not gonna like so other philosophers aren't gonna immediately understand when you use this in these particular ways. But there is some tie. Okay, good. Other questions about clarification? Cool. All right, let's talk about objections. So consider our new claim, our newly clarified claim. It's morally irresponsible to fail to believe in accord with science. Is that true or is it false? Just literally think about it for like just 10 seconds. I'm going to give you 10 seconds. Do you think it's true or false? And maybe last week's discussion will have helped you arrive at an answer to this. Is it true or false? Just think about it for a second. Okay. Here's a reason to think that it's false. What about the scientist profiled in the Sugar Conspiracy, the article that we read? That particular science did not believe, he failed to believe in accord with science, and yet it seems like he was doing something very morally responsible. All right, that's an objection, and it's a form of objection, we'll get to this later, that we call a counterexample. We'll get to that later. Also, what about those who doubted Nazi science? So there's a bunch of Nazi scientists who said, look, genetics is such that this race is superior and this race is inferior. And unless we can somehow come up with a way of saying plausibly that that's not real science, right? That they weren't doing science, or that people around them couldn't have taken them to be doing science, which is going to be really hard because you can do science badly, right? You can have bad science. Unless we can do that, I think we got to say that there are some who legitimately and morally responsibly doubted Nazi science. Sometimes you should doubt science, right? If it's at odds with some fundamental moral commitment that you have, maybe you have a moral responsibility or even obligation to doubt that particular scientific theory or maybe even consensus. All right, so those are objections. Questions about objections? Good. What does it mean to support something? I think you'll all put this together by now. The new claim, it's morally irresponsible to fail to believe in accord with science. Let's support that. Look, here's one case in which it is morally responsible, you might think. If you ignore climate science, that's going to have catastrophic moral results. So say I know about Justin, that he's really into climate change, climate science, he's read a bunch about it, and I know he would be convinced by this claim. I might say to him, but say Justin thinks that it's false, that it's morally irresponsible to fail to believe in accord with science. I might say, look, Justin, I can give you one reason to think that it's true, because here's a paradigmatic case of failing to believe in accord with science. Michael Crichton, he's being a moral monster. He really ought to believe in climate science. We're going to get to a point next lecture where we talk about different sorts of support that you can give. Just as a preview, if I know that Justin is a climate science denier, he thinks there's sort of a conspiracy, like in the sugar conspiracy article, regarding climate science, this might not be a good way of supporting the argument, at least in an argument with him, right? Or rather, not a good way of supporting the claim, at least when I'm arguing with him. If I say, look, what about climate science? He'll be like, exactly, that's why this claim is false. We'll get to that in a little bit. So there's our three tools of argumentation. And now I want to look a little bit about different kinds of philosophical conversations. I want to apply this discussion, these tools, to different kinds of philosophical discussion. So I'm not sure if you can read what's in this table. If you can, go ahead and read it really briefly to yourselves. If you can't read it up here, go ahead and read it on the handout. It should be big enough to read on the handout. So I'm just going to give you, again, 25 seconds just to kind of skim over it and get a sense for what this table, what the information on this table is. Seven more seconds. 2 more seconds. All right, it's fine if you haven't finished reading the table, just so long as you've gotten a general sense of what information's on it. Okay, so what are some differences and what are some similarities between the following three types of philosophical conversations: discussions, debates, and dialogue, according to the information that you just read there? And this, I should say, this is terminology that we will continue to use. We'll refer to sort of the kind of thing that you do when you leave this class with your classmates as philosophical discussions. We have philosophical debates. That's going to be coming up in the second half of the class. And then the dialogues, that's what we do. Dialoguing is what we do in sustained dialogue. Okay, that makes sense. So from the chart that you saw, from the information you saw, also just from your own understanding of these terms, what are some differences? What are some differences between discussions, debates, and dialogue? Or some types of differences? Yeah?
All use arguments.
They all use arguments? Good. So there's a similarity. Similarities or differences. Good. So they all use arguments. What else? Yeah? Styles. I like that. Wait a second. Oh, come on. All right. He looked ahead in the handout. Fair enough. Clever. Styles. Good. Okay. They all use arguments. So wait. Okay. I'm going to turn this back on you. So tell me more. How are the styles different between the three? Or in your understanding, even just like two of them. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Debates are a word that often gets used as adversarial, right? So if you have two lawyers in a court, they're debating, that's the adversarial system of justice, which is a terrible system of justice. Don't tell anyone that I told you that. Yeah, okay, good. So debates are more adversarial than either discussions or dialogues. Good. What else? Just two more, either similarities, differences, and we'll move on to the official ones I listed. Mm-hmm.
They all use different tropes. For example, in debates, you always have the lawyers when they do the cross questioning. You never want to ask a question that you don't already know the answer to.
Yeah.
Whereas in the other two, in discussions and in dialogues, you kind of want to further the questions and try to reach a point where you guys can both mutually agree on an answer.
That was brilliant. What's your name?
Jacob.
And what's your name again? In the blue? What's your name again?
I'm Alex.
Alex, sorry. I should have done this before. What's your name? Will. Okay, cool. Will. Alex. Jacob. Good. Jacob. Good. That's fantastic. I think that's great. So actually, the way I captured part of the point that you just made is I said they differ in their norms and conventions, right? So in a court of law, there are very strict conventions surrounding how debate is to be conducted, right? You can only debate during certain times. You can't get up and just start debating, right? Or like during a bathroom break, you're not doing it right. If the judge is like, all right, we'll adjourn for 5 minutes, and you're like, my first point, no, that's not how it works, okay? There are strict conventions. And also norms, like you said. You don't want to ask a question you don't know the answer to if you're debating, because otherwise you might get stumped. And then you're going to lose points, and that's not good, or you're going to lose the case, and that's even worse. Whereas in dialogues and in discussions, often asking questions that you don't know the answer to is like almost the whole point, right? Like discovering what question it is that's going to bring out a really interesting philosophical thought or theory. It's like the whole point. Brilliant. All right, you guys are the best. All right. So here's just 3 things I really want to highlight just very quickly. So we talked about some differences. Here's some similarities. I'm going to posit, again, slightly controversially, but not super controversially, because this is sort of like a methodological assumption of doing philosophy. Okay, so again, just kind of assume this with me. The purposes of all 3, or at least one of the purposes of all 3 of these, is the same, and that is identifying the truth or getting at the truth, right? Even in the adversarial system of justice, where you have 2 lawyers debating a question, the whole system was set up on the premise that that's the best way of balancing truth with justice, right? With individuals' justice. That's a very controversial claim. Again, maybe one that's false, I don't know. But at least in part, truth figures in as one of the purposes of that form of engagement or form of philosophical conversation. Same with the other 2. We can talk about that later. I liked what Will said. Will, you said they all use argumentation, right? Brilliant. I like what you said. They all use argumentation tools, right? This is very obvious in the case of debates, pretty obvious in the case of discussions. Might not be as obvious how philosophical tools can be used in sustained dialogues. And this is something maybe you can talk about as sustained dialogues. But it's obviously very important to get precise and to get clear and to clarify your own thought or your colleagues' thoughts, right? Just to ask them, is this what you mean or is that what you mean? Like, are you committed to this view or is it this other thing, right? That's really important. Also, raising objections. Again, sustained dialogue is not adversarial, but you might want to say something like this. You might want to say, look, I also identify as a theist, but here's an objection. There aren't any good arguments for God's existence. That's a huge problem for theism. And then you might say, The way I've grappled with this question is I read this book by William James who said, guess what? You don't need arguments for everything. And in fact, theism is one of the things that you absolutely don't need arguments for. In fact, it's bad if you use arguments. So this is how I personally get around that objection. Do others find that sort of compelling, etc.? So that's a way in which the tools of argumentation can be used even in sustained dialogues, right? Finally, the value of all three. I just put that it's derivative of the truth. You can ask me about that later if you want. Okay, good. All right, final slide. Final slide. And then we are going to have our debating time, and everybody's going to get a chance to weigh in. So here's the final slide. Go ahead and just read it over again. Just read it over. It should be in your packets. It's also up there. I think you can read it. Just read that information really quickly, internalize it. So really briefly, this is what we covered. We looked at the elements of argumentation, the aims, the tools, and we looked at philosophical conversations and how argumentation fits into philosophical conversations. Next time, we're going to be talking about argumentation and philosophical writing. We're also going to get just to some advanced strategies regarding argumentation in general. But for now, it's the end of Lecture 1. So we're going to, no, thank you.